In 1999, our beloved Bruce Willis starred in a movie that gave us the now iconic line, "I see dead people." But what was portrayed in that movie is not a made for TV supernatural fairy tale for many, many people around the globe. It is the kind of thing they share in whispers, and oftentimes when their grief is fresh and their loved one has reached out to them from beyond the grave. So grab your candles and tune into your sixth sense, because today we are stepping into the shadowy realm of family bonds that not even death can break.
Immortal Sunshine.
Hello and welcome to the podcast shedding candlelight on cryptids, hauntings, mythology, and more. If it is weird, we are talking about it. This is your host, Donna, and today we are going to talk about the veracity of ghost stories. They are often anecdotal because while many people experience run-ins with the other side, not many other people are around when those encounters happen. So there are no corroborating witnesses. And then if an encountee chooses to speak about what they experienced, they are all too often met with heavy disbelief, which is sad, really, because interactions with the dead are represented in various forms in every known culture and religion, spanning across centuries. There are sometimes even rules in those cultures and religions regarding when one should accept or reject those offered interactions with the dead. Furthermore, the written word itself, the good book, the book of books, and even those religious books that differ or deviate from the core biblical beliefs, broker no argument about the question of life after death. Our spirits do live on by pretty much everyone's account. And by most of those same accounts, spirits have indeed walked in the realm of the living, showing themselves to the living for a myriad of reasons. So, why then are some folks so opposed to even entertaining the idea that ghosts are real and interacting with us right here in this plane? While we are not going to get into the semantics of ghost versus spirit on this show, to me, the only real questions on this topic are: why do spirits choose to interact with the living? How do they interact with the living? And why do some living people have many more encounters with the dearly departed than others? All questions we are also not going to get into on this show. What we are going to do in honor of Father's Day is dive into familial interactions, specifically surrounding deceased fathers or grandfathers, because this is the category of interactions that encompasses a very large portion of the world's population. Post death encounters with father figures is one of the most commonly reported interactions. Many believe this is because the men in our lives are the protectors, the ones who make us feel safe, secure, the ones who tell us everything is going to be okay. And you do not have to look far or even too hard to find stories of people interacting with these men who are gone but not forgotten. Social media is full of parents posting videos of their toddlers and young children seeming to interact with deceased fathers or grandfathers. These young children are smiling, laughing, and even waving goodbye while calling out the name of the person who is there that no one else can see. Parents discuss these stories on parent forums, and there is no shortage of support when it comes to having a child who sees dead people, because it is just that common. In one case, a parent documented how their child repeatedly interacted with their late grandfather shortly after the man they called Grandbob passed away. In another account, a woman shared that just weeks after her father died, her young daughter was sitting in front of a computer doing her homework. This little 8-year-old girl was struggling with the work that day. And when she looked up from her computer screen, she saw her grandfather standing there just as plain as day. The grandfather did not speak to her. He just stood there quietly watching her, supporting her in that moment of struggle. The little girl said she was not afraid, but instead felt calm and seen because it had been her grandfather who used to help her with her homework. So maybe Grandpa was there to let her know that he would always be there to ground and calm her whenever she was struggling and needed him most. Another mom posted that just days after her dad had passed away, her young daughter proclaimed that she saw Grandpa standing in the living room. This little girl then went on to tell her mother details about Grandpa, things that mom had never shared and could not figure out how her young child would know if not for Grandpa being the one to tell her, as the little girl insisted. A son reported that weeks after his dad had died, he woke up to find his dad sitting at the foot of his bed. Dad did not speak. He was just sitting there checking in with his son, who reported feeling safe and calm in his dad's presence. An 8-year-old daughter described waking up to hear footsteps in the hallway outside of her bedroom. She knew what her father's footfall sounded like, and therefore she knew it was him out in the hall, standing guard over her while she slept. Another man recounted being at summer camp as a boy. His father had died in a car crash years earlier. And one night, while walking alone on a dark road back to his cabin, the boy suddenly saw his dad. He said his dad was blurry but unmistakable, and that he was standing just off the road the boy was out there walking on all alone. His dad did not speak or give any words of encouragement. He only smiled, and with that smile, the boy knew he was safe. He was no longer afraid to be out there in the dark all by himself because he knew his dad was watching over him. And so the boy kept walking and made it safe and sound back to his cabin. These kinds of gentle, comforting apparitions are extremely common in paranormal accounts. Children, especially, seem to see these apparitions clearly, and more often than not, what they describe are full bodied apparitions. They report that the father or grandfather looks normal, just how they did when the child saw them last. Occasionally, though, they do report their father or grandfather looking slightly younger. Reasons why are speculated as the soul being healed of an illness after death, or even a hunched posture straightening, or the heavy burdens of life being lifted from the countenance instead of this being an actual reversal of age. Either way, children feel safe and calm during these encounters with their paternal dead folk, and many times it is reported that the apparition appeared to the child during moments of emotional need, like school stress, large events such as sports games or camps, or during some form of routine that is now changing, leaving the child in a state of upheaval now that their paternal caretaker has died or their family has moved. The going theory is that if dad or grandpa was the comforter, the strength or the backbone, or helped with certain things when he was alive, then he might show up after death, during, or just before those same events or tumultuous times to let the child know he is still around, watching and caring about them. But dad does not only care about the children. While these types of stories are more common with children, Adults do report seeing the men in their life after they have passed on to the great beyond. One woman described feeling her late husband's hand on her back, one gentle pat, just how he always used to do it. Now, I am going to tell you a story that is not a father returning, but it could be our Father in heaven, certainly intervening on behalf of one of his children. I will try not to cry while telling you this, but you can expect there to be tears. There is a bug flying around. I don't know if you guys can see it on screen, so maybe it will distract me enough that I won't get as emotional when I'm telling you this story. When I was about 21, I met an older gentleman who had just lost his wife. She had been gone about 6 months at that point, and I do not recall exactly how long they were married, but it is safe to say over 40 years. He met her when he was really young, and they married before he left to join the military. He then went into ministry after his service to the country, and he had been a preacher at this point for about 40 years. So, again, safe to say their marriage was one of the rare ones lasting over 40 years. Because of his age, though, this man had stopped preaching a couple of years prior, but he still seemed as sharp as a whip, and he was driving, taking care of his bills, the groceries, all of the sort of life things. He was also very happy and incredibly sweet. He was jovial and always had a smile on his face, except for one day. And sadly, it was the last time that I saw him. Like I said, his wife had passed away, and when you are older and living on your own, people do worry about you. I am not that old, and my husband is a nervous wreck every time he leaves me alone for a day or two. So I get the position of the people in this man's family. However, what the man told me this day was that he was not alone, that each night his wife got in the bed with him. He told me how every night for those long and many years they had been married, they went to sleep with her head resting on his shoulder. He said they made it a point to fall asleep just like that, whether they were mad at one another or not. His first night after his wife died and he was alone in their bed, he told me that he sobbed, that he talked to God and told him that he could not live without his wife. He knew in that moment when he was alone that he could not go on without her. When he was at the height of his despair, he felt her, his wife, getting into bed with him. He could not see her, but he could feel her physical presence, her body moving over to him, her head resting on his shoulder. He could smell her, feel her there curled up next to him the way she had been for all of those years before. And every single night since that first one, she came to him at bedtime, and he went to sleep how he always had, with his wife next to him, her head resting on his shoulder, and her scent all around him. He said that some part of him knew not to say anything about his wife still being there, resting beside of him at night. That even though he could not understand why people would not believe that if not his wife's spirit coming to comfort him each night, that it was the hand of God providing him with the comfort his senses and his heart needed. To this man, he did not care which one of those that it was, because either way, to him, it was his wife, her presence or her essence. But things came up, and he did tell his son. He told some of the folks from his church who had decided to make it their mission to check on him every day. Basically, he told them because he wanted them to know that he was okay and that he kept busy during the day, and then he had the greatest comfort each and every night. All of these people he told, including and especially his son, decided that this man was losing his mind. This last day, when I spoke to him, his son was in the process of attempting to force his dad out of his house and into a home, since dad said no to moving in with the son. Needless to say, this man was devastated. He felt betrayed, and sadly, he did not live much longer after that because he said again that he could not live without his wife, and that if he was forced out of his home, he was worried she would not come to him anymore. And if that was the case, then he would rather be absent from his body and present with his wife. Because this man was a preacher, he was just so shocked that those around him would deny that God would love and care about his own people enough to send them such a comfort. He talked about the Bible and all of the accounts of spirits coming back to interact with the living, and yet here these people in his own life were causing him so much pain. He was a good man, a solid man, one whose story I believed then and I still believe now. Whether what he was experiencing was real or imagined, he was functioning in his daily life and not hurting anyone. He was simply a man who loved his wife, and when he lost her, he did everything he could to hold on to her. His story is a pretty extreme one, but it does track with many of the norms surrounding paranormal activities. And I am a crybaby. My daughter in law must be sensing something because she's also a witch like me. And she's texted me like 13 times while I've been recording this piece and not doing a very good job because I can't stop crying enough. And now the bug is back. It wasn't bothering me while I was trying to tell you this man's story, but now it's back. Most encounters happen in the days, weeks, or months directly following the death, while a person's grief is raw and heightened. Some encounters are prolonged over large spans of time, but yet others do not occur for many years. One widow reported that she and her children would hear her husband calling out their names when they were in the house, and that he did this at times when the person whose name he called needed help or some kind of extra attention or assurances. In another story, a man had passed away suddenly. Months later, his adult son was driving late at night on a familiar road when the son felt an overwhelming urge to slow down. He looked up, checking his rearview mirror, where he saw his dad's face. It scared the bejesus out of him, and he slammed on his brakes, narrowly missing the deer that bolted across the road right in front of his car. His dad was gone when he checked the back seat, but the son had avoided an accident and to this day tells everyone that it was his dad who saved him that night, or at least saved damage to his car, if not his life. A really fascinating story comes from a family who says that after the patriarch of their family died, the entire house felt, quote, off, end quote. They say that lights would flicker and that objects would move around all on their own. So basically, they were having a full blown haunting. Or, as one speculated, it was a poltergeist manifestation because all of the activity seemed to center around the youngest child in the family. One night, the deceased husband figured out how to communicate more clearly since his wife and the other kids were not taking the hint with the lights and the things being moved all around his younger daughter. Apparently, dad got some info on the other side that he did not like, so he finally musters up the strength to vocalize and tells his wife in a clear voice, check on her. So his wife races to their youngest daughter and sure enough finds the little girl suffering from a fever that was so high. Doctors later told the mom that the fever was so dangerous that every minute had mattered. So kudos to dad for saving his little girl from the other side. A grieving widow reported her husband repeatedly appearing in dreams or as a shadow, steering her away from bad decisions like financial pitfalls, their finances being something he had handled in life. One man recounted his dad showed up on the eve of a risky surgery and simply said, "Don't go." In the morning, the man canceled his surgery and said that later there were complications that the surgery would have exacerbated. These types of protective warnings echo through many families as if death sharpened dad or grandpa's instincts to guard the ones they left behind. And these types of stories follow consistent patterns that are reported across cultures and decades. Maybe because so many people grew up seeing these men as the steady ones, the fixers, the protectors. But not every spectral dad brings comfort. Some return with urgent messages or warnings, but some return with vengeance in mind. These fatherly spirits are unsettled, they are troubled, angry, or even trapped. There is one popular case that has been investigated on multiple ghost hunting shows where a widow and her children began to hear noises and see shadows in their house shortly after the husband and father died in a tragic accident. The wife and the kids assumed the haunting they were experiencing was their beloved signaling he was there, so he could simply tell them goodbye. But the gentle noises grew into slamming doors and growling voices. The children then began to describe seeing a figure that looked like their dad, only the thing they saw had hollow eyes. The presence in the house became increasingly aggressive and the family progressively terrified. They called for help, bringing in investigators and television cameras to capture the haunting in real time. What investigators walked away with was the impression that whatever entity was in the house was not purely a beloved father. They suggested that the family's grief had opened a door and it was one that allowed something wearing their father's face to walk through. The family then opted to kick the thing out via a whole house cleansing, after which they were left alone to grieve in peace without grieving so hard that they opened another door. In a different case, a son described how his father's spirit showed up and would replay old arguments, his voice rising in empty rooms. They were beside themselves, not knowing what to do. His dad would not stop tormenting them until each family member began to address their father's grievances, apologizing and working out their own unresolved guilt. So, if you really want to see your loved one again, this could turn into a be careful what you wish for scenario. What most families report is what is referred to as a residual haunting. This is where the person is not always seen, but his or her presence is sensed in other ways that usually last for long periods of time, sometimes even decades or centuries. Think of a haunted restaurant where every day at a certain time you hear the long dead barkeep walking down the stairs to the old cellar, or dad's favorite chair creaking every day at the time when he used to sit down for the evening, or a husband's cologne perfuming the air at the end of every workday, or his favorite hammer being found on the workbench in the garage every morning. Harmless, spirit fueled compulsions. Adults tend to feel touches, hear the voice of their lost loved one, or smell a scent that is uniquely theirs. Children tend to see full body apparitions, and in all of these scenarios, patterns emerge. Protective dads appear in times of need and usually in the first few months after their death, but the unsettled or angry ones linger, replaying their regrets or traumas and sometimes taking those things out on their families. But there is one last category of sightings, and these come to us from the nearly departed. Many years ago, a hospice nurse told me that she did not believe ghosts were real because she knew they were real. She knew there was an afterlife because of what she experienced in her career. Her story was like that of many others who have dealt with death. She said that some people had peace around them when they neared the door to death, that they would talk about the family members who were there in the room with them to usher them into the afterlife. This nurse reported hearing those on their deathbed having conversations with the unseen spirits in their room, and that on occasion, her patients would tell her exactly how long they had to live. They would name the date and the time to the exact minute and claim that their loved ones had told them when their spirits would be free to cross over. She also told me about that peace and that calm and even the joy that was a living, breathing presence in the rooms of some of her patients. She said it was something palpable, something that would immerse you when you walked into their room, and that even those people who were in a great deal of pain often had a measure of peace about them that stood in stark contrast to others who, in some cases, were not nearly as bad off. She told me about the patients who made her fear that hell is very, very real. The ones who saw terrible things that made them yell and scream, the patients who would point into the corners of the room and beg for her to keep those things they saw away from them, the people who begged the nurses not to let them be taken. She described hearing these people scream for their lives and watching them die in what she could only describe as horror, terror, in ways that shook her to the bone. Those people were the ones who haunted her dreams, made her want to live a better life so that in the end, she would not leave this living realm gripped in the arms of that terror, but at peace and hopefully comforted by the warm smiles and gentle hands of those who had gone on before her. The idea of being ushered to the other side by those loved ones who went before us is an ancient belief. Again, these are concepts peppered throughout religions and cultural beliefs around the world. And I often think about this concept when you read an obituary. We have a tradition here in the States, anyway, of listing those who preceded the newly deceased in death. We usually list parents or grandparents, siblings, spouses, and even extended family like aunts, uncles, or cousins. We also list those who are left behind here on earth to mourn and remember the newly departed. The structure of the obituary draws the line between the living and the dead, with our newly departed being right in the middle of the two, one spirit going on to be greeted by the already dead with the names of those it leaves behind listed, so we might know who will be there to greet them whenever their time comes. In our family, just before my husband's grandfather passed away, someone took a picture of him sitting in his sunroom. In that picture, standing just behind grandpa, is my father in law, who died 8 years earlier. The concept of entities, be it a familiar loved one or some other form of spirit guiding souls into the afterlife, is an ancient and widespread belief. These figures are often called psychopomps, which is derived from Greek language naming the escorts as a guide of souls. Some of these guides are benevolent, while others are simply neutral and there to do their job. But others are cruel. They are the grim reapers you want to run from if you don't want to end up spending your eternity in whatever version of hell or purgatory you believe in. And these entities in all of these different forms have been talked and written about for thousands of years across cultures around the globe. In ancient Egypt, the jackal-headed god Anubis presided over mummification and guided souls to the Hall of Judgment, where their hearts were weighed. He was not a punisher. He was one of the neutral escorts, simply there to do his job and ensure safe passage for the souls. In Greek mythology, Hermes, later known by the Romans as Mercury, acted as the messenger who led souls to the river Styx, where the ferryman took over, taking these souls on their intended journeys. Trips that were not always pleasant. There were perils along the way, and the ferryman also required payment for his services. In Chinese folk religion, entities whose names I shall not attempt to pronounce, but that roughly translate to the black and white impermanents, are a pair of deities who collect and escort souls to the underworld. They are often depicted as ghostly figures in contrasting colors, and I believe this is a symbol of one's life being measured in terms of the good and bad in all of us, the human experience being more of a gray area where people tend to slide to one side or the other depending on who they are and honestly, probably how much empathy they have, because it is that empathy that works as a rudder, allowing us to focus on others instead of only our very selfish selves. Other traditional guides are the Hindu Yama or Pushan, and the Aztecs had a dog-headed guide whose name I am choosing not to butcher today. Some Islamic traditions have the angel Azrael gently separating the soul from the body to then carry it forward into eternity. And of course, we all love the stories of the Norse Valkyries who carry chosen warriors from where they lay slain on the battlefield into the honor of the halls of Valhalla. Beyond those cultural gods and soul collectors, we have centuries of dying people often reporting seeing parents, spouses, or children who passed before them, standing at the bedside, offering comfort and welcoming them home. We have this recorded in modern day hospice studies, which is pretty cool, actually, and terrifying to some degree when you hear the firsthand accounts from some of the hospice nurses. But these deathbed visions have been documented for centuries. Sir William Fletcher Barrett was a British physicist and prominent parapsychologist who was born in Kingston, Jamaica on February the 10th of 1844. He passed away in London, England on May 26th of 1925 at the age of 81. During his career, he was a respected physicist, was a fellow of the Royal Society, and was knighted in 1912. In his 20s, he became interested in research of what is considered the pseudo-scientific variety, his interest being piqued after experiments with mesmerism, which is also known as animal magnetism, which is the precursor to modern hypnotism. At the time, this was all considered physical research, and Barrett helped found the Society for Physical Research in 1882, where he was involved in early studies of telepathy, mediumship, poltergeist, and dowsing, which is divination using simple tools to locate underground substances. We are probably all familiar with people who do water divination. So that is what dowsing is. And you can also, in theory, use this method to locate minerals, oil, lost objects, and even unmarked graves. In the early 20th century, Barrett conducted extensive research into deathbed visions. He collected stories of patients seeing deceased relatives just before passing and noted that these types of visions often brought the patient peace and reduced their fears. He noted the visions appeared real or vivid to the patient the same way they are described in the more modern hospice studies today. Barrett's wife, Lady Florence Barrett, was a physician, and she assisted his research while working with women dying from childbirth complications. She took notes during these times and recorded numerous cases where patients reported seeing deceased relatives. She recorded that these visions often brought comfort to her patients and that they had a sense of being welcomed into the afterlife. Barrett then combined all of the research, analyzing the data to explore what evidence he had to prove that there is life after death. He organized the cases into categories. One was visions of known deceased relatives, which is what we have been talking about, where parents, siblings, spouses, friends, and the like are all there and they bring comfort to the dying. Another category was visions seen by others who were present, meaning that sometimes bystanders would witness the same apparitions or phenomena as the dying, which the photo we have of Grandpa with my father-in-law standing behind him could fall into this category, as well as sounds and smells that bystanders experience and the dying confirm is due to the ghostly presence of the person connected to those things. Barrett put music heard at the deathbed as a whole separate category, and he also had one that encompassed visions of living persons at a distance, meaning there were instances where a dying person would report seeing or interacting with a person who was living. Now, this would happen at a distance, as in the dying person would see this currently living person off in the distance. What turned out to be happening was, despite the dying person not knowing that the living person was sick or in any kind of danger, these visions would occur right before the dying person finally passed on. And then the living person who had been seen at the distance would either die themselves or find out that they were near death, maybe with some kind of a terminal illness. And sometimes the living person who had been seen by the dying reported having seen the dying person either at a distance or in a dream. And these reciprocal sightings happened at the exact same time. Like each of them was being allowed to look through the veil, glimpsing each other at the exact same moment as an omen that they would soon be together on the other side. Barrett had a category called Visions of the Spirit Leaving the Body, and noted that in these cases, the people who often reported seeing someone's soul leave their body were those who were skeptical of there being any such thing as life after death. Then, after seeing this phenomena, the skeptics were true believers and expressed that they had recognized a lifting soul was indeed their now deceased loved one. They further noted that upon witnessing this phenomena, they were overcome with a sense of peace. Barrett viewed these cases as potential evidence of a spiritual world that was communicating with the living, though he did seem to approach this particular topic with some level of scientific caution. Do not ask me why. I am skeptical of most things, but not this. I have seen and heard too much, and very clearly the dead can communicate with us. The last category is one that I personally think is most fascinating. Visions of persons the dying person did not know was dead. This is the category that gave Barrett the strongest pieces of evidence for life after death. In these cases, the dying person would see a relative or friend, so someone they knew, only the dying person did not know that the relative or friend had already died. For Barrett, this ruled out any preconceived ideas that a person was simply seeing the person they expected to see when they were ready to cross over. And it ruled out the possibility of the dying person simply hallucinating based on facts that were already known to them. I heard a story like this once. There was a woman who was in the hospital on her deathbed, and no one wanted to tell her that one of her sons had been killed in an accident the day before. But then she started crying that afternoon, and when her other kids in the room asked her what was wrong, she told them her son was there. She recounted the details of how he died. I'm sorry if I'm going to cry again. It's only like the fourth time in this recording. But anyway, she told them that her son was there, and she recounted the details of how he died, and she was upset with her living children for not telling her. But ultimately, she was then ready to go to cross over into the great beyond, where she would be with her son because she knew he needed his mom there with him, and she told her family as much before she took her last breath. Barrett's findings were published in 1926 in a book titled Deathbed Visions: The Physical Experiences of the Dying. As a child, I talked to an uncle who had died before I was born. It is a very long story and one for a different day. But this uncle protected me then, so he does fit the narrative of father figures looking out for their loved ones. In my later years, I came to think of him as somewhat of a guardian angel, one I did not realize I was related to until the day my horrified mother dug out an old photo of the man and asked me if that was the man I had been talking to. But a shorter story, though, one I will still make too long because I am a writer and this is what we do. This is the story of my dearly departed grandfather. I was about 10 years old when he died, and I had not been particularly close to my grandfather. He was hardworking and quiet and mostly kept to himself, kind of like me. He was quite a bit older by the time I came along, and my memories of him are that he grew an amazing garden that I got chased out of many, many times. I like to eat his tomatoes right off the vine, so if I was there to help, I could stay, but when I started snacking, I had to go. Grandfather also had a moonshine still in his dirt floor basement, and if you got caught in there where I had been told no less than 10,000 times not to go, well, a swig of kerosene that he called moonshine was the punishment. But my grandfather would also walk to the liquor store and buy a fifth of liquor nearly every day after my grandmother won the battle and got him to stop brewing the kerosene in the basement. And occasionally, if grandfather was nice and sauced and there was a grandchild within reach, and literally you had to have been brave enough to walk past or run past his recliner, which became a game, and every once in a while, grandfather would reach out and snatch you up and tear the skin off of your face with his 5 day shadow. It hurt like the dickens for about 10 seconds, and then he would let you go, and everything was fine. And honestly, I always saw it as a punishment for the hundreds of times we kicked over his spittoon. It was so disgusting. I still remember that smell. And I ran so fast and hard every time because no one could catch me. And there was not a chance that I was going to clean that up. Outside of those few core memories, the only other one I have of him is from when I was about 4 years old. There was this small window of time when I was not yet school aged, but my mother was working near to where my grandparents lived. So when she would drop me off there, I would spend my day following my grandmother around, doing tours with her, and then we would sit and watch our stories to have ourselves a little break and something to eat. During this time, I did sit and talk with my grandfather some, but mostly I was with my grandmother, and she would tell me stories while we worked, usually Aesop's fables, those types of stories. The grasshopper and the ants was a particular favorite of hers. But one day she caught my grandfather telling me the story of the princess and the pea. He had told me the story a couple of times before. And on this day, my grandmother came in and told him not to tell me that story anymore because he would have me thinking that I was a princess and I was most certainly not. So, anyway, those are my grandfather stories and the memories that I have of him. Not a lot of them. And I am telling you this because some of us do not have close connections with a lot of people, or maybe really any people. But that does not keep us from having folks who care for us, even when we have no idea that we really ever meant anything to them. And also, sometimes the people who die are the ones who really never had anyone. And I think my grandfather might have been one of those people who really did not get much love or attention in his life. When he died, I remember being at the funeral home and things just felt weird. I was overcome by this feeling of sadness that I still carry in my chest today. I wish I had known him more, asked him a lot of questions, learned more from him than the few things that I did. I wish I had been able to know how better to care for him. To me, it seemed as if he was taken much too soon. Even though I would not have considered us close or tight knit, he was important to me, and I was struck by how I had never told him that. And all of these really heavy, profound things were running through my young head that day, and they still come back to me 39 years later. One night, I do not recall if it was the night of grandfather's funeral, but I would say that it had to have been fairly close to that time. But I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed. He was wearing his dressing gown, those nightgown style shirts that men used to sleep in back in those days, and he seemed backlit to me. I could see him very plainly and very clearly. He stood there for a long while, the two of us just looking at one another. I was not afraid, but I was startled. I couldn't understand why he was there or how he was there. A little part of me almost thought, oh, wow, Grandpa didn't die. But finally, though, he spoke and he told me everything is going to be okay. Then he was gone, and I was left with this overwhelming peace. Life was hard back then, and whenever I was afraid or hurt or upset, I would always think about him standing there that night and the sureness of his words to me. I believed him when he said everything would be okay. And that belief got me through so much. Since that day, when I think of my grandfather, that is how I see him. Other images have faded, but that one is still as crisp as the night I saw him standing there at the foot of my bed. So, while not all encounters are warm and fuzzy, as I have experienced and so many others with me, when we see these men, they feel and look exactly like the men we knew. They speak with the voice we know and move with the gaits that are familiar to us. The hundreds of thousands of fathers and grandfathers showing themselves in some way to the people who knew them in this life is a recurring theme that has persisted throughout the ages. It is a sign that their presence lingers here in this realm even after they are gone from the ranks of the living. Are the encounters a final gift, whether it be one to comfort us or to haunt us? Or is the showing of the men who were often protectors simply a sign to the living that they are there, watching and waiting at the edges of the veil, a promise to let us know that they will be there to meet and collect our souls, guiding us when it is our turn to cross over? I know I look forward to the day when I can ask my grandfather all the things I wished and thought about these past 39 years. And I feel like his life alone is proof that we are not measured by our good deeds or our failures, but by the truth of what really lies within our hearts. If you have experienced a spectral dad, a protective presence, or even an uneasy one, I would love to hear about it. You are welcome to hit me up on the socials. I even joined TikTok recently because I keep telling myself, then I am going to be more engaged and do all of the things. But I committed to doing TikTok for 3 months, posting 3 times a week, and that lasted for exactly 2 weeks. I am who I am, and social is just not part of my DNA. But I am on all of the social platforms, even Pinterest, which I really couldn't ever figure out and have not looked at in probably over a year. So choose your own adventure. But if you would like to significantly increase your chances of getting a personal response from me, maybe even me letting you know how much I cried when I read your story, you should email your correspondence to leedawnabooks@gmail.com. All of my books are on my website. I write thrillers and fantasy, and you can grab ebooks, audiobooks, and signed paperbacks directly from my Shopify store at leedawnabooks.com. I did go ahead and package my fantasy series into a trilogy box set, and that will be up by the time this episode goes out. And I still have a couple of free books available on my website. If you really do not want to shop directly with me, you can still grab all of my books at your favorite retailer and through your local library. Other than that, thank you for spending your time with me today. I hope the corners of your rooms and the shadows of your life are filled with those who are lovingly watching over you. Unless that totally creeps you out, then I hope they are just empty, dark spaces, which also feels very weird to say. So turn on some lights, grab some tissues, and I will see you next time. And maybe not in the way you are expecting. Not going to cry again. So emotional. Why am I so emotional? Relax,